The Cedar Keys are an island chain along Florida's nature coast that are named so for the abundant cedar trees in the region. The U.S. Army would initially establish a fort called Fort Number 4 on the mainland adjacent to the islands, and in 1840, General Zachary Taylor would request that the Cedar Keys be reserved for military use until the end of the Second Seminole War, which was going on at the time. Soon, the region would have a lighthouse to the south of the main key on Seahorse Key, and a military hospital would establish on what was then known as Depot Key, but would later be known as Atsina Otiki. Eventually, in 1841, a troop deployment station and a detention camp for a captured Seminole would be established on Seahorse Key alongside the lighthouse, but in August of 1842, the war would end. And in October of the same year, a hurricane would destroy much of the military infrastructure that was left on the islands. Therefore, the base would be abandoned. After the Army left the Cedar Keys, they became available for settlement under the Armed Occupation Act, which aimed to increase white settlement in the region. In 1851, a city would be chartered in the area, known as Atsina Oti. Cedar Key would become a very important port city in the region very quickly, shipping lumber and cedar slats to make pencils. And in 1854, a much larger lighthouse will be built on Seahorse Key, and Cedar Key would become the terminus of the newly built Florida Railroad. When the war began in 1861, the lighthouse on Seahorse Key would be extinguished to aid in the defense of the Cedar Keys, and their defense would be assigned to two companies of the 4th Florida Infantry Regiment, under the command of Colonel M. Whit Smith. In January of 1862, Cedar Key will be raided by the USS Hatteras, and several ships and buildings will be burned, along with a portion of the railroad and of the railroad track. And in October of the same year, another raid would destroy a large salt supply. In early of 1864, the Union would occupy Cedar Key, and they would stay there for the remainder of the war. In 1867, John Muir, the famous naturalist, founder of the Sierra Club, and father of the National Park System, would walk 1,000 miles from Louisville, Kentucky to Cedar Key in just 2 months. While living in Cedar Key, Muir would contract malaria, but would recover and sail to Cuba in January of 1868. He would record his impressions of Cedar Key in his book, A 1,000-Mile Walk to the Gulf, in which he would state, Cedar Key is 2½ miles in diameter, and at its highest point, it is 15.44 feet above mean tide water. It is surrounded by scores of other keys, many of them looking like a clump of palms, arranged in a tasteful bouquet and placed in the water to be kept fresh. In 1869, the town of Cedar Key would be incorporated, and by 1870, its population would surpass 400. In 1886, Henry Plant's railroad to Tampa began service, and Tampa would take shipping away from Cedar Key. In 1890, Cedar Key's mayor, William Cottrell, had to be ousted via military intervention due to his attempts to try to establish dictatorial rule over the island via restricting access to the city and attempting to use thugs to commit violent acts against the people of Cedar Key. He would have to, or the Coast Guard and the U.S. Marshal Service would have to team up to invade the island and to depose him. In 1896, the Cedar Keys hurricane would would devastate the island and would be the final blow to the town, with more than 100 people dying in the storm. And in December of the same year, a fire would further damage the town. Today, very little of the town of Atsina Otiki remains, and most of the wooden structures are rotting away. Atsina Otiki is out that way, and it is quite literally a ghost town that is inaccessible by land. Cedar Key itself, however, would begin to become a tourist destination due to its history in the 1950s. The lighthouse on Seahorse Key would be abandoned in 1952, but the University of Florida now uses it as a marine biology research station. Cedar Key is now a tourist center, and people come from all over the world to walk amongst the old fishing wharf and the old Main Street, or to go boating, fishing, or kayaking in the wildlife refuge established by Herbert Hoover in 1929. Is an enigma, and it has come a long way from a military outpost to a tourist town, from the terminus of the Florida Railroad and a major shipping city to what is pretty much a sleepy little getaway in the corner of Florida. Cedar Key is an amazing place, and it is one of those types of places that you have to see to believe. But don't take my word for it. Come see it for yourself.